My name is Daniel, and I am 58 years old. When I close my eyes, I still see the house where it all began, a small, broken place where the walls seemed to carry more shouting than laughter. My father was a man of harsh hands and colder words, hardened by his own failures, and he carried that bitterness into our lives. For him, discipline meant fear. I learned silence early, because silence was safer than speaking. But there was also my mother. She worked double shifts at a diner, came home with aching feet and weary eyes, yet somehow still managed to tuck me in at night. She was my shield, my proof that love could exist in a place filled with anger. She whispered to me, "You are more than this house, more than these nights." Those words became my lifeline. We were poor. Too poor to dream beyond the next meal. Some nights, dinner was a slice of bread with sugar sprinkled on top, and I would pretend it was a feast. My shoes had holes that let in rain, and kids at school laughed at me. I laughed with them sometimes, just to hide how deeply it cut. Poverty does not just live in your pockets, it burrows into your heart, making you feel smaller than everyone else. Yet, within that darkness, tiny sparks of hope glimmered. A kind teacher once told me I was smart, and I clung to her words like a drowning boy clings to driftwood. My mother's smile after an exhausting day was enough to make me believe we might survive. Those years carved me. They broke me in ways I could not see then, but they also planted the roots of endurance. I did not know it at the time, but I was being shaped into someone who could withstand storms. My childhood was a silent struggle, but it was also the beginning of a story I am only now ready to tell. When I turned 13, the weight of my childhood carried itself into my teenage years. By then, I had already learned to hide my bruises, not just the ones on my skin but the ones carved into my spirit. At school, I was the quiet kid in the back row, the one who didn't raise his hand too often, not because I didn't know the answers, but because I feared drawing attention. Attention at home had always meant pain. My father's presence became heavier as I grew taller. He seemed to see me as competition rather than a son. Every mistake, no matter how small, became proof that I would never measure up. I remember once dropping a glass of milk at the table. The glass shattered, and before I could even apologize, his hand struck me across the face. The sting faded, but the humiliation lasted for years. Friends were rare. I watched other kids laugh together after school, riding their bikes in groups, while I walked home alone, head down, pretending I had somewhere important to be. In truth, loneliness became my closest companion. Yet, in that silence, I discovered books. The library was my escape. I could walk into those aisles and, for a few hours, step into worlds where fathers didn't break their sons, where boys like me became heroes, where pain could be turned into strength. Reading became more than a hobby, it was survival. My mother noticed. She saved coins to buy me second-hand books from yard sales. She told me, "Your mind is your way out, Daniel. Don't let this place trap you." I didn't fully understand then, but those words planted the first seeds of hope that maybe, just maybe, my life wouldn't always look the way it did. Teenage years should be about freedom, but mine were about survival. Still, within that survival, I was quietly building the resilience I would one day need to face a world much harsher than the one I already knew. After losing Anna, I told myself I would never let my heart be that vulnerable again. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. In my mid-20s, I met Sarah. She was different, not the kind of woman who swept you off your feet in a whirlwind of passion, but the kind who grounded you, who made you believe that maybe stability was possible. Sarah had a gentle laugh and an even gentler soul. She came from a simple family, not wealthy but rich in kindness. She didn't look at me as the boy from the wrong side of town. She looked at me as a man trying, struggling, but refusing to give up. That alone felt like a gift. We married young, perhaps too young, but at the time it felt right. I remember the day clearly, a small church, borrowed suits, hand-me-down dresses, and a reception made up of casseroles and pies from neighbors who barely knew us. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. When our first child was born, I held her tiny hand in mine and promised her a life better than the one I had known. The weight of fatherhood was heavy, but it was a weight I welcomed. Every sleepless night, every extra shift I worked, felt like steps toward breaking the cycle I had inherited from my own father. For a few short years, life gave me peace. I came home to laughter, to the smell of Sarah's cooking, to little arms wrapping around my neck. The broken boy I had been began to believe he was finally becoming the man he had always wanted to be. But life, as it often does, had storms waiting on the horizon. At the time, though, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, hope had found a permanent home in me. I wish I could say marriage stayed as warm as it began. But the truth is, love alone is never enough when life keeps throwing storms your way. By my early 30s, Sarah and I were drowning in responsibilities. Bills piled up faster than my paychecks. I worked double shifts, sometimes 3 days without real sleep, trying to provide. She stayed home with the children, overwhelmed and often alone. At first, the distance between us was subtle, a missed conversation here, a tired sigh there. But slowly, silence grew louder than words. I would come home exhausted, and instead of laughter, I found arguments waiting for me. She accused me of caring more about work than family, and I accused her of not understanding that work was the only reason we had a roof over our heads. The breaking point came one night during yet another fight. I saw in her eyes something that chilled me, not anger, but emptiness. She had given up on us long before either of us admitted it. Within months, she filed for divorce. The day the papers were signed, I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but a box of clothes and a hollow chest. My children were the only thing I fought to keep close. But even then, custody was split, and I found myself in an empty apartment half the week, staring at walls that seemed to close in on me. Rock bottom isn't one moment, it's a collection of small moments stacked on top of each other. Eating dinner alone. Missing a birthday because of a late shift. Hearing your child call another man "Dad" for the first time. Those moments carved into me like sharp glass. I had thought I'd known pain as a child, but nothing compared to the pain of watching a family you built slip through your fingers. I was broken all over again, this time not as a boy, but as a man who had failed at the one thing he swore he'd do differently. After the divorce, work became my only anchor. I buried myself in long shifts, thinking if I worked hard enough, the emptiness inside me might fade. Hospitals, construction sites, warehouses, I took whatever came my way. My hands were calloused, my back ached, but at least labor kept me from drowning in silence. For a while, I believed hard work alone could rebuild me. I pushed myself past exhaustion, hoping my bosses would notice, that one day the sacrifice would turn into stability. But life doesn't reward effort fairly. Promotions went to men who played golf with the manager, not to the man breaking his body on the floor. Raises skipped over me while others with smoother words climbed ladders I never even saw. The betrayal wasn't just professional. I trusted friends who promised partnerships, who said we'd build something together. Twice I invested what little I had in their ventures. Twice I was left with nothing but empty pockets and excuses. Each betrayal cut deeper than the last, because I had so little to give in the first place. At night, I would lie awake and think of my children. How could I teach them to trust in hard work when all my hard work left me broken and broke? Sometimes I wondered if I was cursed, destined to repeat the cycle of disappointment I had been born into. Still, I kept going. Not because I believed success was waiting, but because stopping meant surrender, and surrender meant letting down the only two souls who still looked at me with love, my kids. Every scar on my hands, every unpaid bill, every bitter betrayal became part of the armor I wore. It was a brutal season of life, one that tested everything in me. But it was also the chapter that taught me resilience isn't about winning, it's about refusing to quit, even when you lose again and again. By the time I reached my 40s, the years of struggle had carved themselves into my body. My back ached with every bend, my hands were stiff from years of labor, and some mornings I could barely drag myself out of bed. But pain wasn't the only battle, I was fighting loneliness too. The kids were growing fast. They had their own friends, their own worlds, and though they still loved me, I could feel the distance creeping in. I didn't blame them. Children shouldn't carry the weight of their father's scars. But each time they left after a weekend with me, the silence of my apartment felt heavier than ever. My health began to falter. Doctor visits turned into lectures about high blood pressure, about stress eating away at me. You need to slow down, they said. But how could I? Bills didn't slow down. Rent didn't wait for my blood pressure to settle. Even friendships slipped away. Men I once worked alongside drifted into their own lives. Some found success and didn't look back. Others numbed themselves with alcohol and bad choices. I found myself caught somewhere in between, still fighting, but unsure what I was fighting for. Nights were the hardest. That's when regrets came knocking. I thought about Sarah, about how I failed her, about Anna, the love I lost before I ever knew how to hold it. I thought about my father, and how I swore I'd never be like him, yet sometimes I feared his shadow still lived in me. But within those restless nights, something else began to stir. A small, unexplainable voice inside me whispered that my story wasn't over. That maybe there was more to my life than endless labor and quiet pain. I didn't know it yet, but midlife wasn't just about battles, it was about the start of a turning point I never saw coming. By my late 40s, after decades of broken dreams and endless labor, I stumbled upon something unexpected: writing. It didn't begin as a plan, or even a hobby. It started one night when the loneliness in my apartment felt unbearable. I picked up an old notebook my daughter had left behind, and without thinking, I began to write. At first, it was just fragments of thoughts, memories of my childhood, words I had never spoken aloud, the pain I had carried for so long. Once the pen touched paper, it felt as if a dam had broken inside me. Words poured out faster than I could catch them. I wrote about my father's anger, about Anna's goodbye, about the night I signed my divorce papers. Each page was heavy, but with every sentence, I felt lighter. It was as if writing was the only place where I could tell the truth without fear of being judged. I started writing every night after work. Sometimes only a few lines, sometimes entire stories. I didn't care about grammar or spelling, I cared about honesty. Soon, those notebooks piled up, each one filled with the pieces of a man trying to make sense of his own existence. One evening, I gathered the courage to share a small piece online. Just a short story about a boy who felt invisible in his own family. I expected nothing, maybe even ridicule. But instead, strangers commented, "This feels like my story," and, "You put my feelings into words." For the first time in my life, I realized that my pain wasn't wasted, it could connect me to others. Writing didn't fix my problems, but it gave me purpose. It gave me a reason to stay awake at night, not out of despair, but out of creation. And for the first time since I was a child, I believed I had found something that was truly mine. The more I wrote, the more I realized I wasn't just telling my own story, I was giving voice to people who felt invisible, just like I once had. Slowly, my words began to travel. A few of my stories were shared by strangers online, then by groups I had never heard of. Every time I saw someone comment, "This is me," I felt a strange kind of healing. My scars were becoming bridges. By my early 50s, I started receiving messages from young people, kids barely in their 20s, telling me my words gave them strength. Some were struggling with broken families, others with poverty, others with loneliness so deep it mirrored my own youth. They told me they read my writing late at night when they felt like giving up, and it made them hold on. That recognition wasn't fame. It wasn't money. But it was purpose. For decades, I had worked jobs that left me exhausted and unseen. Now, with a pen and a battered notebook, I was more useful to the world than I had ever been. Soon, I began writing essays, longer pieces, and even started speaking at small community events. Standing in front of a room full of people terrified me, but when I saw their faces nodding, their eyes glistening with unspoken pain, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was helping others survive too. My children, now grown, told me they were proud. Hearing those words was worth more than any promotion, any paycheck I had ever chased. For so long, I thought my legacy would be scars and failures. Instead, it was stories, honest, imperfect stories, that gave others the courage to keep walking. At 58, I don't measure success by wealth or status. I measure it by the voices who write to me, saying, "Because of you, I didn't give up." That is a legacy no one can take away. Now, at 58, I sit in the quiet of my small home, looking back at the journey that brought me here. My hair is gray, my body aches more than it used to, but my heart carries a peace I never thought I'd find. For years, I measured myself by what I lacked: money, stability, approval. I thought my story was only about failure. But now I see that survival itself was victory. I carry scars, yes, but I also carry lessons. I know what it means to be invisible and what it means to be heard. I know the weight of betrayal and the freedom of forgiveness. I know how it feels to lose love, and how it feels to find purpose in unexpected places. Most of all, I know that even the most broken boy can grow into a man who builds something meaningful. When I write, I no longer do it just for myself. I write for the lonely teenager who thinks no one understands, for the single parent who feels like they're failing, for the man or woman staring at an empty room wondering if life has passed them by. I write to remind them that pain is not the end, it's a chapter. At this age, I don't crave riches or recognition. I crave honesty. I crave the chance to leave behind words that will outlive me, words that might comfort someone long after I'm gone. If my story proves anything, it's that brokenness is not the end of a life, it can be the beginning of a legacy. So this is me, Daniel, 58 years old. A man who was beaten but never defeated. A man who stumbled but kept walking. And if you take nothing else from my life, take this: no matter how deep the darkness, there is always a way to carve light. As the years pressed on, the one thing that kept me steady was my children. They were no longer little ones running through the house with toys in their hands. They had grown into young adults, building their own lives. Yet, somehow, they never let me feel like I had been left behind. After my illness, they visited more often. My daughter would cook for me, laughing when I insisted I could still handle the kitchen. My son would fix things around the apartment, quietly showing the same protectiveness I once had for them when they were small. For a man who had feared losing them after the divorce, every hug, every conversation, felt like healing stitched into my soul. One evening, my daughter brought over an old photo album. We sat on the couch flipping through pictures I hadn't seen in years, birthdays I thought I had ruined with my absence, moments I believed were forgotten. But she pointed at each photo and said, "Dad, you were there. Maybe you were tired, maybe you looked worn out, but you showed up." Those words carried more weight than she knew. I had spent so long believing I had failed them. To hear them say otherwise was a balm my heart desperately needed. We began new traditions. Sunday dinners, simple but sacred. Walks in the park when the weather allowed. Long phone calls when they were too busy to visit. Each moment reminded me that even though life had stolen so much, it hadn't stolen everything. Healing didn't come all at once. It came slowly, through laughter, through forgiveness, through the realization that love had survived every storm we faced. For a man who had once been broken beyond measure, my children were proof that not all endings are tragic. Some are just new beginnings in disguise. In my mid-50s, I believed life might finally offer me a second chance at love. After years of loneliness, I met a woman named Claire. She was kind, thoughtful, and for a while, I felt like maybe my story could be rewritten. We spent evenings walking in the park, drinking coffee, and talking about dreams we had both put aside. For the first time since Sarah, I let myself hope that companionship was possible again. But second chances are never guaranteed. As months passed, I realized that Claire wanted a life I could not give. She longed for travel, luxury, and the kind of stability I had never known. I tried to keep up, stretching my savings, exhausting myself just to make her smile. It reminded me of my younger days with Anna, me trying to prove I was enough, while deep down knowing she wanted more than I could ever offer. The breaking point came when she told me, gently but firmly, that she needed someone further along in life. I understood her words for what they really meant. She wanted someone richer, someone who could give her everything I couldn't. It stung, but I didn't fight her. I had learned that forcing love only leads to deeper wounds. When Claire walked away, I didn't feel the sharp heartbreak I once did. Instead, I felt a dull ache, the kind that reminds you of old scars. I realized then that some people are meant to pass through your life, not stay in it. That failed second chance taught me something important. My worth could not be measured by how well I could keep someone from leaving. I was tired of proving myself. At 58, I wanted peace more than I wanted romance. And though the loneliness still lingered, I finally accepted that love, if it ever returned, would have to find me as I am, not as someone I'm pretending to be. In life, we expect friends to be anchors, the ones who hold us steady when the storms rise. But by the time I reached my late 50s, I had learned that even friendships are fragile. People I once laughed with, worked beside, and trusted with my secrets slowly drifted away. Some left quietly, carried off by distance and time. Others left sharply, their absence marked by betrayal or bitterness. I remember one friend in particular, Mark. We had worked side by side for nearly a decade, sharing meals, late-night shifts, even dreams about starting something of our own. When I fell sick, I thought he would stand by me. Instead, he disappeared, answering fewer calls until the silence became permanent. Later, I learned he had spoken poorly of me, calling me a man who couldn't get his life together. Those words hurt more than his absence. At first, I felt hollow, wondering if I had been foolish to trust anyone at all. But in that loneliness, I began to see something clearly. Strength had never come from others, it had always been born from within. Friends had supported me at times, yes, but they had not carried me through my darkest hours. I had. So I stopped chasing people who walked away. Instead, I poured my energy into those who stayed, my children, a few kind souls from the writing community, strangers online who somehow felt closer than friends I'd known for years. Losing friends taught me that not everyone who starts with you is meant to finish with you. And though it left me with scars of disappointment, it also left me with resilience. True strength, I realized, wasn't found in the company I lost but in the courage I kept, even when I stood alone. When I first began sharing my writing, I thought of myself as the storyteller, the one giving wisdom born from scars. But life has a way of humbling you. At 58, I found myself becoming the student again, learning from people I never expected to. One evening, I received a message from a young man named Michael. He was only 19 and had stumbled across one of my stories online. His words were shaky, filled with pain, but they reminded me of my own teenage years, the loneliness, the fear of not being enough. He told me he was thinking of giving up, that life felt too heavy for him to carry. I didn't know what to say at first. Who was I to guide anyone, when I had stumbled so much myself? Still, I wrote back. I told him what I wished someone had told me at his age, that pain does not mean you are weak, that scars do not mean you are broken, and that sometimes surviving a single day is a victory worth celebrating. To my surprise, he thanked me and said my words kept him holding on. In the weeks that followed, more young people reached out. Some were battling depression, others were lost in broken families, some were simply searching for a voice that understood. I realized then that I wasn't just writing for myself anymore. I was writing for them, for every person who needed proof that survival was possible. The unexpected teacher was not me. It was life itself, using these young voices to remind me that my purpose was greater than I imagined. In helping them, I was helping myself. And in their eyes, I saw the reflection of the boy I once was, only this time, he wasn't alone. When I first began sharing my writing, I thought of myself as the storyteller, the one giving wisdom born from scars. But life has a way of humbling you. At 58, I found myself becoming the student again, learning from people I never expected to. One evening, I received a message from a young man named Michael. He was only 19 and had stumbled across one of my stories online. His words were shaky, filled with pain, but they reminded me of my own teenage years, the loneliness, the fear of not being enough. He told me he was thinking of giving up, that life felt too heavy for him to carry. I didn't know what to say at first. Who was I to guide anyone, when I had stumbled so much myself? Still, I wrote back. I told him what I wished someone had told me at his age, that pain does not mean you are weak, that scars do not mean you are broken, and that sometimes surviving a single day is a victory worth celebrating. To my surprise, he thanked me and said my words kept him holding on. In the weeks that followed, more young people reached out. Some were battling depression, others were lost in broken families, some were simply searching for a voice that understood. I realized then that I wasn't just writing for myself anymore. I was writing for them, for every person who needed proof that survival was possible. The unexpected teacher was not me. It was life itself, using these young voices to remind me that my purpose was greater than I imagined. In helping them, I was helping myself. And in their eyes, I saw the reflection of the boy I once was, only this time, he wasn't alone. By the time I reached 58, I had learned something important: the past never truly leaves you. It clings to your skin, hides in your dreams, and shapes the way you see the world. For years, I tried to run from it. I told myself if I worked hard enough, loved enough, or forgave enough, I could erase what had happened to me. But life doesn't work like that. The past is always carried forward, it becomes part of the weight you bear. What I didn't understand until now was that carrying the past doesn't mean being crushed by it. It means learning how to build with it. Every scar I earned, every betrayal I endured, every moment of pain became bricks I could use to create something meaningful. Writing taught me that. It showed me how to take ashes and shape them into stories that could warm others, instead of letting those ashes choke me. I began to think of my life less as a series of failures and more as a foundation. The broken childhood, the loneliness, the divorce, the betrayals, none of it was wasted. Each chapter gave me lessons I could now pass on to others. And while I couldn't change the fact that suffering had marked me, I could decide what to do with those marks. I no longer dream of riches, or of recognition from those who once dismissed me. What I dream of now is simple: to leave behind words that outlive me, to build a future where my children, and maybe even strangers, know that pain doesn't have the final say. The past may always ride on my shoulders, but the future is something I can still build, one word at a time, one story at a time, until the day I am gone. For most of my life, I thought victories were supposed to be grand, winning big, achieving dreams, proving everyone wrong. But at 58, I have learned that life's truest victories are often the smallest ones, the kind that don't make headlines but still carry you through. A small victory is waking up on a morning when depression tells you to stay in bed. It's paying a bill on time when once you thought the lights would be cut off. It's cooking a meal for your children and seeing them smile, even if it's just spaghetti on paper plates. I remember one particular day, not long after I recovered from my illness. I walked a mile without pain. To most, it would seem insignificant. But for me, it was proof that I wasn't finished yet. Another time, my son called just to ask for advice, and for a moment I felt like a father who mattered. These little wins stitched my heart back together piece by piece. Writing, too, gave me countless small victories. Each time a stranger said my words made them feel less alone, I counted it as a triumph. Each page I filled was a reminder that my story hadn't ended with failure, it was still being written. I no longer wait for the world to hand me approval. My victories are measured in the quiet things, in laughter around a simple dinner table, in the message of hope from someone I've never met, in the realization that I survived another day I once thought I couldn't. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that small victories build the strongest foundation. They may not change the world all at once, but they change you. And sometimes, that's enough. For years, I thought failure was proof that I wasn't good enough. Every job I lost, every dream that slipped through my fingers, every broken relationship, I wore them like chains. But at 58, I've learned something different. Failure is not the end of the story. It's the teacher we often try hardest to avoid, but the one we need the most. I failed at love, and it taught me that love cannot survive without honesty and effort from both sides. I failed at friendships, and it taught me not everyone is meant to stay, no matter how tightly you hold on. I failed at jobs, and it taught me that no paycheck can define my worth. Failure stripped me of illusions. It broke the false belief that life had to look a certain way to matter. When everything you thought you needed is taken away, you are left with the truth, who you are when nothing else remains. The hardest lesson was realizing that failure didn't mean I was unworthy, it meant I was human. Every person stumbles, every person breaks, but the ones who grow are those who rise again. For too long, I was ashamed of my mistakes. Now, I see them as scars that remind me I lived, I tried, and I learned. If I could speak to my younger self, I'd tell him, don't fear failure. Fear the life where you never take risks, never try, never love, because you were too afraid to fall. Success might inspire people, but failure connects us, it reminds us we're all fragile, all searching, all learning. At 58, my failures have become my greatest teachers. They didn't end my story. They gave it depth. And for that, I am strangely grateful. For most of my life, forgiveness felt like surrender. I thought forgiving meant letting people off the hook, excusing the damage they caused. So, I carried grudges like weapons, believing they would protect me from being hurt again. But in truth, they only poisoned me from the inside. At 58, I have finally begun to understand what forgiveness really is. It is not forgetting. It is not pretending that the pain didn't happen. It is not saying, it's okay. Because sometimes, it wasn't okay at all. Forgiveness is choosing not to let the bitterness consume you anymore. It's releasing the grip that anger has on your soul. I had to start by forgiving my parents. They couldn't give me the love I needed, and for years I blamed them for everything that went wrong in my life. But holding on to that blame kept me chained to the same childhood wounds. Letting go didn't excuse them, it freed me. I had to forgive friends who betrayed me, partners who left me, employers who dismissed me. And the hardest part, I had to forgive myself. For the times I gave up, for the mistakes I made, for the years I wasted drowning in shame. Self-forgiveness is the mountain I am still climbing, but each step brings me peace I never thought possible. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Some people I forgave, but I never let them back into my life. The act of forgiveness was for me, not for them. It cleared space in my heart where hope and joy could finally return. When I look back now, I realize my journey would have been impossible without forgiveness. Without it, I would still be trapped in the past. With it, I am finally free to walk toward whatever time I have left with a lighter heart. For a long time, I lived without hope. I woke up each day expecting only more of the same, more disappointment, more loneliness, more pain. Hope felt dangerous because every time I let myself believe things might get better, life reminded me how quickly dreams could be crushed. So, I stopped hoping altogether. But something inside me refused to die. Even in my darkest days, a small spark remained. It was in the way the sun warmed my face on a cold morning. It was in the laughter of my children, even when money was tight. It was in the strangers who told me my words made them feel less alone. Slowly, piece by piece, that spark grew into something stronger. Hope didn't return all at once. It came in quiet moments. When I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had survived every storm thrown his way. When I realized my past no longer had full control over my present. When I understood that broken things can still be beautiful. At 58, hope looks different to me than it did in my youth. Back then, I hoped for wealth, for recognition, for success that would impress others. Now, my hope is simpler, and far more powerful. I hope for peace in my heart. I hope to love and be loved. I hope to leave behind a story that shows others they are not alone. Hope no longer feels dangerous. It feels necessary. It gives me the strength to wake up tomorrow and believe that the life I have left can still hold meaning. Hope is not about denying the pain of the past, it's about daring to believe the future can still carry light. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all, realizing that no matter how many times life breaks you, hope will find a way to rise again. At 58, I have come to realize that life is not measured by the number of people around you, but by the depth of the relationships that truly matter. For most of my younger years, I chased approval. I wanted to be liked, admired, respected. I surrounded myself with people, thinking numbers equaled worth. But when my life fell apart, most of those people disappeared. What remained were the few who truly cared. The friend who showed up when I was sick, without being asked. The neighbor who checked in when she noticed my lights hadn't turned on in days. The child who held my hand when I thought I couldn't go on. These are the relationships that matter, the ones that show up in silence, not in applause. I also learned that some relationships, no matter how much history they hold, need to be released. Blood ties don't always mean love. Sometimes family wounds cut deeper than anything else. It took me decades to accept that it was okay to let go of toxic bonds. That choosing peace over loyalty doesn't make you cold, it makes you wise. And then there are the relationships we build with ourselves. For years, I neglected that one. I spoke to myself with harshness I'd never use on a stranger. Only recently have I begun to treat myself with the kindness I give others. That, too, is a relationship that matters. At this stage of life, I don't need crowds. I need honesty. I need depth. I need the kind of love that sits with you in your worst moments and still sees your worth. And I've learned to treasure it when I find it, because it's rarer than gold. If there's one truth I carry now, it's this: relationships that matter don't just make life easier, they make it meaningful. If there's one thing that grows heavier with age, it is regret. At 58, I sometimes lie awake at night thinking about the choices I didn't make, the words I didn't say, the moments I let slip through my fingers. Regret has a way of sneaking into the quiet hours, whispering, "What if?" I regret the years I wasted trying to please people who never cared. I regret the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken up, and the times I spoke in anger when silence would have been wiser. I regret not being more present with my children when they were young, too busy worrying about survival to realize how quickly those years would pass. But regret, like failure, has taught me. It has shown me what matters now. The past cannot be changed, but the present is still in my hands. I cannot go back and relive my 30s or 40s, but I can choose to live my 58th year with intention. I can choose to pick up the phone and say, "I love you," instead of assuming people know. I can choose to take risks I once avoided because I was too afraid. I've also realized that regret loses its power when you turn it into action. Every what if becomes a reminder: do better today. Be braver today. Love harder today. Carrying regret is heavy, but letting it guide you instead of control you, that is where freedom begins. And though I still have nights when the weight feels unbearable, I remind myself, I am still alive, which means there is still time to make different choices. For most of my life, peace felt like something far away, something other people had but I could never reach. My mind was always noisy, filled with guilt from the past, fear of the future, and anger at the people who had hurt me. Even in moments of silence, I carried chaos inside. At 58, I've realized that peace doesn't come from fixing everything around you. It comes from learning how to live with what cannot be fixed. It comes from quiet acceptance, not resignation, but the courage to say, this happened, and I will not let it define me anymore. I found peace in small rituals. Morning walks where the rhythm of my steps calmed my racing thoughts. Writing down my feelings instead of letting them poison me from within. Sitting in silence, listening not to the world but to the sound of my own breathing. These simple acts taught me that peace is built moment by moment, choice by choice. I also learned that peace is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of balance. Life still brings storms, but I no longer fight every wave. Some I let wash over me, trusting I will not drown this time. Forgiveness opened the door, but acceptance allowed me to step through. Most importantly, peace came when I stopped chasing perfection. I will never undo all my mistakes. I will never be the father, friend, or man I once imagined. But I can still be good enough. I can still live these years with kindness, with love, with honesty. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the broken boy or the angry man. I see someone who has survived enough storms to know that calm is possible. And in that calm, I have finally found something I searched for all my life: peace within myself.
A week after leaving the hospital, I returned to my mother's old house, the place where everything began and ended. Dust covered the furniture, but her scent lingered in the air, faint yet comforting. I walked to her study, the room I had avoided for years. The note from the hospital echoed in my mind. There's more under your mother's name. I searched through drawers, boxes, and finally the old wooden desk. Beneath the bottom panel, I found a hidden compartment. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in faded lace. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside lay a folded letter and a single silver key. The letter was in her handwriting, elegant, trembling. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means the truth has finally reached you. I wanted to tell you so many times. About Henry, about the Daltons, about the life I ran from. But every truth came with a price, and I couldn't let you pay it. The key belongs to a safe in New Orleans. Inside, you'll find documents proving how far they went to silence us. It's your choice whether to reveal it. But remember, sometimes justice isn't about revenge, it's about peace. Love always. Mom. Tears blurred my vision. For years I had carried anger, pain, and questions. Now all I felt was quiet understanding. My mother hadn't been weak, she had been protecting me in the only way she knew how. I looked out the window at the rising sun. The world felt new again. My scars still hurt, but they reminded me of what I survived. I folded the letter carefully, slipped the key into my pocket, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." Then I walked out the door, toward a life that was finally mine. Speech balloon. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful life stories.